This recording will cover Chapter 3 in your textbook, Method Working with Families in Transition. I was about to read you the title of the textbook once again, but that's okay. So we're going to talk about families and transition, in relation with our students with high incidence disabilities. So including the parents and the family is really, really, really important, right? The children belong to them. Ultimately, we just see them for a little bit of time during the day, but we need to make sure that we are including the families and their expectations and what they want their students to get out of school, basically. So, collaboration between parents and schools is required to meet the needs of students with HI in schools and to prepare for positive transitions. When they work together, special educators and families can provide a student with HI with an appropriate education, whatever appropriate means to that student, right? The IDEA provides for the involvement of parents in their child's special education. Families can provide valuable information to educators about their child's development and learning experiences at home. Families can also partner with educators to help students extend learning to home, including supporting them in succeeding at stuff like homework, right? So, if you have your own children, maybe they struggle with homework. Maybe when they get home, they're like, oh, don't make me do anymore. So think about a child with a disability and the families of a child with a disability. Homework is probably not a pleasant time, right? So the closer and the stronger collaborative relationships, I guess is what I meant to say, between school and home, the more successful, hopefully, everything will be for the student. Okay, so, we don't know how families react when they find out they have a disability or how the disabilities manifest themselves. So that's a very personal impact that there's the disability has on the family. So as the school part of it, how can there be more collaboration and again to really form these partnerships? Okay, so research evidence has shown that positive family relationships does create a sense of purpose for families, especially for families who it might be the initial diagnosis for their student, for their child, and they might be going through a lot of different, kind of the grief stages of grief. So if the families can help advocate for their child, it does create a sense of purpose for them. And you also want to think about effective methods for communicating with parents. What's going to work best? Face-to-face, phone, email. I think I told y'all in the last chapter, we had a parent who couldn't get off work. So we went to see her at work and that worked. I didn't really mean that, but you know what I mean? That was a successful partnership between us. She couldn't take time off work. And so instead of getting angry and saying, well, forget it, I can't do it, just forget it, we worked it out and we said, we will come to you. That is fine with us. We will be there. We will come to you. So thinking about how that's going to work. True family involvement is really a complex process. So ideally, schools and parents or families will enter into a collaborative partnership where they truly value one another's skills and expertise. By partnering at every stage of the special education process, students are more likely to receive a successful education that is relevant to their life in school and beyond. We also want to think about what's going to happen to them when they transition, out of high school, right? So we want to think about all these benefits that are involved in parent involvement. Okay, so again, how can you as the person in the schools help with some of these benefits? Okay, so if you just try to take over as the teacher or the school psychologist or the whatever, and you try to dictate to these parents and these families how their child's life is going to go, even within the schools and then beyond, that's not going to lead to a positive relationship. It's going to lead to the parents feeling excluded and not being a part of their own child's education. So also we want to think about, don't make stereotypes about the family's linguistic abilities, socioeconomic status, education experiences. You don't know their lives, right? That's what I always say. You don't know my life, but it's true. We don't know everything that happens or that has happened up until this point in the student's life. We want to think about how can we as the education system work with the family to develop more positive relationships so that the student hopefully will ultimately see the benefits. Okay, we really need to put the student first in all of this. So don't develop credibility and trustworthiness. Okay, and which again is a two-way street but you need to show the parents that you can be trusted with their child for 8 hours a day or 7.5 hours a day or whatever it is, okay? And do not assume that parents know what educators expect of them or that they are comfortable partnering with the school. Some parents might not want to, step on any toes. So they might be kind of hesitant. So if you can kind of draw those parents in, you will most likely have a more positive relationship with those families. So IDEA expectations, remember IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, expectations for involving families in special education. So due process is, I'm going to tell you what it is, what the actual definition from the book is. It's probably right here. A legal safeguard of parents and schools' rights, referring to a process for protecting rights that is not arbitrary and is consistent with the law. Okay, so sometimes you might need to have, some formal proceedings if parents aren't happy, if schools aren't happy, instead of just as a school saying, oh, well, we're going to choose not to serve this child. We're going to choose not to provide this special education service. Well, no, you don't really have that option. Due process is a provision of the law. Okay, so sometimes it will need to be a little more formal. Parent and student participation. This is a provision of the IDEA stating that parents or family members, right, or caregivers must be invited to participate in every stage of special education, not special education. I did not do that. But you want to make sure that the families are included from the very beginning. You don't want to all of a sudden call the families in let's say March of the school year and say, oh, haha, your child has autism, or your child has a learning disability, your child has ADHD. The parents and the families really need to be involved from the get-go, okay? If you have concerns, if a gen ed teacher might have concerns, you really need to get the parents involved and at least let them know kind of what you're going to do next, how you're going to proceed. Maybe the child is not at the stage where they are getting tested and identified as having a disability yet, but you want to make sure the parents are involved. So again, you don't just spring it on them at the end and say, surprise, your child has a disability. We also need to think about informed consent. So this is another requirement of IDEA that parents have been fully informed of all information related to proposed activities, kind of just what I was talking about, that they understand and agree in writing to carrying out activities, that consent is voluntary and that it doesn't apply to activities already occurred. So we need to make sure parents and families are fully informed. Okay, if we think the student is struggling, maybe we let them know early on, maybe September, October, call them in for a conference and just kind of say, hey, maybe the gen ed teacher, hey, I've noticed that Georgia, my dog, that Georgia is struggling in learning their letters. I'm going to keep a close eye on Georgia. We're going to try maybe some tier 2 interventions, which are kind of some small group interventions. We'll revisit in a month and I will let you know what, if I'm seeing any response to interventions. Okay, and we want to make sure that they understand, special education is voluntary, right? Like they don't have to say, yeah, go ahead, test my child. Some people, for cultural or religious or guilt or whatever reasons, they might say, no, thanks, we're good. That happened. The parent that I've been talking about that we went to see, at her workplace for a very long time, her child was diagnosed or identified as having an emotional and behavioral disability, and the mom didn't want to agree with that. So the mom did not sign the paperwork. The mom refused to come in for meetings, at first. She thought the child was just being labeled because of the type of child he was. And it took us probably a good 3 months, I would say, before she finally said, okay, you know what, I agree. I think that you all could help him. Let's have a meeting and sign the paperwork. So that's when we went to her workplace, but it took a while. Okay. So, don't necessarily expect or parents or families to be on board right away. Some of them are going to say, no, I don't want to believe that this is true. Right. All right. So some opportunities for parent involvement in the special education process. Well, the special education process as a whole, right? So it's kind of thinking about, screening, anything that might happen, any results of those screenings, and then maybe some interventions. Like I said, tier 2, some of those smaller group interventions, tier 3, maybe where the child works one-on-one with someone. That's kind of all part of the special education process. Early childhood special education, that's for, our younger children. Some parents might be the one to come to you. They might call a group called Child Find, which I'll get back to in a second. They might contact Child Find and say, hey, I think my child is behind. Like, can you do some assessments? When I taught in Charleston County, I was on the summer Child Find team. I love that job, by the way. So in case anyone has the opportunity to get involved with Child Find, I loved it so much. Progress reports to parents, making sure that we are keeping parents informed of the progress. When report cards go home for every other student, they need to make sure, or progress reports, they need to go home to students with disabilities as well. And again, upholding, standards for working with family, positive relationships, developing those positive relationships. So again, going back to early childhood special education, this is where things like early intervening might come in, which is providing intervention as soon as possible, as soon as a possible need is detected. So not saying, oh yeah, we're going to wait till they get to school, till they turn 5 or 6. No, start as early as possible. Pre-referral, I think we talked about this a little bit, a process which includes trying to resolve a difficulty a child has with academics or functional performance by collecting information about the student's difficulties and modifying instruction based on that data to see if the problem can be resolved. So that's really a gen ed thing. That's really before they get to special education. That's where we're looking at response to intervention. What other interventions can we try? We're looking at universal design for learning. What else can we do to meet this child where they are, so that maybe it's not really a disability that they have. Maybe they're just a little behind. Maybe we can catch them up. Okay, so that's your pre-referral. Referral is where an educator or parent or family member, caregiver, may, not just like, oh, my sister thinks I might have a disability. No, it needs to come from, the caregiver, the parent, the family. An educator or parent, I use that word in quotes, makes an official declaration that a disability is suspected or known to exist and that the option of special education should be investigated. Remember, special education is not I hope you're filling in the blank, it's not a place, right? Those special education are the services and the individualized supports to help these students be more successful. Okay, so that's a referral. So screening is an informal assessment of the child's potential for having a disability. So we're not formal yet here, but that's when we come into evaluation. That's where, you might say, oh, that student has been referred for a special education evaluation. You might hear something like that. So that would be where the school psychologist gets involved, the special ed teacher gets involved, the gen ed teacher, the family, where everyone gets involved to determine, does the child actually have a disability? Are they eligible for special education services, right? Not sending them to special education. So eligibility determination, the meeting would be a meeting between parents and professionals. Again, all those people I just mentioned, maybe an occupational therapist, maybe an SLP, whoever of the related services providers might be necessary. Meeting between parents and professionals knowledgeable about the child's possible special education needs, in which a determination is made as to the child's eligibility, remember under IDEA, and needs for special education services. Is every child going to be determined to be eligible for special education services? No, right? And that's kind of what we want. If that were the case, it wouldn't be special education services anymore. It would just be education, right? So we want to make sure that we are going through all these steps and stages before we finally say, hey, you know what, this student is not responding to intervention. I'm seeing this difficulty with this student. Here's where their peers are performing. Here's where Georgia is performing. Maybe let's do a formal evaluation and determine if the student is eligible for special education services. Okay. Again, not everybody is going to qualify for special education services. Okay, so opportunities for parent involvement continued when there are disagreements. Okay, maybe the parents don't agree with what you found. That's where we go back to that due process. Okay, and then the development of an IEP, remember, individualized education plan, program, whatever words you want to say there, because there's a different variety, or individual family service plan, which is called IFSP. Those are for our younger students, okay, before they reach about school age, okay? They will have an IFSP. Also thinking about supporting interventions at home, and again, keeping parents informed of the progress. All right, I'm gonna stop right here, and we will come back starting on this slide for part 2.